Welcome to the second in my IR Theory Bite-Size series. In this short video we'll be taking a look at realism. Realism is the oldest theory of IR with philosophical roots dating all the way back to ancient Greece and specifically to a guy called Thucydides. Realism in its modern form seeks to explain the behaviour and interaction of sovereign states. By states, essentially, we mean countries and their governments. From a realist perspective, the starting point for understanding state behaviour is the concept of anarchy. By anarchy, we simply mean that there is no authority above and beyond that of the nation state. There is no world government, there's no world police, and therefore there is nothing to stop states, and especially the most powerful states, from doing what they want. Under these conditions, realists argue that the only thing that matters is power. Thucydides summed this up almost 2,500 years ago with the phrase, "The strong do what they can, the weak suffer what they must." This statement really sums up realist thinking. What it means essentially is that the strong states, the strong powers, do whatever they like because they can, and the weak just have to suck it up because there's nothing they can do about it. Under these conditions, realists argue it is not rational for states to trust one another. Realism assumes that states are rational actors, that they will make rational choices. Under conditions of anarchy, it's impossible for a state to be sure that other states are not going to attack them, not going to double cross them. Even if a state appears to be an ally, you can't be sure that they won't double cross you if it's in their own interest to do so. You have to assume that everyone else is looking after their own interests, and therefore you have to look after your own interests, and you have to work on the assumption that any other state could screw you over. So you don't trust anyone. You can't afford to trust anyone. Under those conditions, this creates what we call a self-help system. States have to rely on themselves, and they aim to maximize their own power. Why? Because the more powerful you are, the less likely you are to be attacked. From the realist perspective, it's a game of winners and losers. You either are a winner or you are a loser, and everyone wants to be a winner. So states are competing to maximize their own power, their own capability relative to the other states, and this is the source of power politics. Following on from this, another very important concept in realism is the idea of the balance of power. And once again, this goes all the way back to Thucydides. The basic idea is that if one state, or perhaps one alliance of states within a system, is more powerful than the others, then the others will automatically see this as a threat and will seek to counter this by creating a balance of power, what we call power balancing behaviour. Now there's two ways that they could do this. They could either increase their own capabilities, so try to become stronger themselves, but they could also band together to form an alliance in order to balance the power of the perceived threat. So to illustrate this, let's imagine a system where one state, which we'll call state A, has vastly more military power and also economic strength than the other states in the system. So again, according to realist perspectives, the other states will automatically therefore see state A as a threat. One way that they can respond to this threat would be to increase their own military power. So they could increase the size of their army, the size of their air force or navy. They could build more missiles, build more nuclear weapons, or whatever it may be. But even so, none of the states has the potential. Perhaps they don't have a sufficiently big population or a sufficient industrial base or a sufficient economy to be able to fully match state A in terms of power. So although states B, C and D have got stronger, none of them is a match for state A still. So what else can they do? Well, of course, they can join together to form an alliance. And now, collectively, the alliance, which we can call the BCD alliance, has enough power overall, has enough military capability overall to balance the power of State A. If we're looking for real life examples of this balancing behaviour, a good example might be the alliance system which grew up in Europe prior to the outbreak of the First World War in 1914. And another example might be the Cold War alliance system, which existed from the late 1940s up until the late 1980s. Now, while states may cooperate in forming an alliance system when they have common interests, for example, opposing a mutual threat, realists believe that such cooperation is not likely to last in the very long term. States do not have permanent friends. States only have their own interests. And if the situation changes so that cooperation is no longer in their interests, then the alliance will break down. A good example might be the alliance system which existed in the Second World War. So during the Second World War, the USA and USSR were on the same side because they had at that time a common enemy in the form of the Axis powers. However, as soon as the Axis powers had been defeated, the alliance between the USA and USSR broke down because realists would argue that it was inevitable in a sense that as soon as these two powers were kind of the last superpowers still in existence, that each would automatically identify the other as a threat, and therefore the wartime cooperation broke down, the alliance dissolved and was replaced by confrontation between the two superpowers. And because realists are sceptical of the prospects for long-term cooperation, they also tend to be very sceptical of international institutions like the United Nations. Realists believe that, obviously they recognise the existence of these institutions, but they believe that they are likely to be controlled by the dominant powers, and ultimately these institutions don't make any real difference to the underlying reality of power politics, according to realists. This cartoon illustrates how realists see international institutions such as the United Nations as effectively being on the leash of the hegemonic states, the greatest powers. So, in summary, power is the only thing that matters in the anarchic international realm, according to realists. The strong do what they can, the weak suffer what they must, as Thucydides put it almost 2,500 years ago, and to a realist that statement is still as true today as it was back then. States are assumed by realists to be the main actors in international politics, so realism is a state-centric paradigm. States are assumed to be rational actors, they will make rational choices. Under conditions of anarchy, i.e. no world government, no authority above and beyond that of states, under these conditions, according to realists, the only rational choice is to trust no one, and for states, therefore, to pursue their own national interests defined in terms of power. This competition for power leads to conflict and also to power balancing behaviour. and the existence of international institutions such as the UN does nothing to change this underlying reality of power politics. So hopefully that's given you a bit of an overview of the main points of realism. Obviously we've skimmed over the surface quite quickly, given that this is only a short bite-sized video. So if you'd like more information, then I'd encourage you to check out my longer video on this topic. In the next video in this series, we'll be looking at the traditional counterpoint to realism, which is the liberal paradigm on international relations.